This empire may look like a forgotten relic sitting on the ruins of old Rome, but in reality, it was the last barrier preventing the ancient world from collapsing into darkness. It kept knowledge alive when other kingdoms forgot it. It guarded faith when borders fell apart, and it stood between chaos and continuity. People today think Byzantium was just the leftover Rome, something slow and fading. But it was the thin wall that stopped history from breaking in half. If Byzantium had not survived when it did, the world you know today would look nothing like this. There would have been no great network of learning for Europe to rediscover later, no foundation of law to rebuild states on, and no cultural bridge holding East and West together. Without this empire preserving texts, schools, scholars, trade routes, and stable government, Europe would not have rebuilt itself. It would have started over from zero. And once you start from zero, it does not take decades to recover. It takes centuries. Byzantium was not just a survivor, it was a memory keeper. When other kingdoms lost libraries, forgot old languages, or let scholars disappear, Byzantium still copied, studied, and guarded the knowledge of the ancient world. It was the place where Aristotle, Plato, Euclid, and Galen were not distant memories, but daily tools. While the West struggled through constant invasions, and many regions returned to oral tradition and local custom, Byzantium kept written learning alive in classrooms, courtrooms, and monasteries. It is easy to imagine Roman knowledge slowly fading everywhere. But it did not fade here, because this empire refused to forget, and this matters. Because forgotten knowledge is not waiting in storage, it is gone forever. If Byzantium had not preserved these works through copying, debating, and teaching them, the next generations would never have seen them again. The ideas that later powered the Renaissance did not magically reappear. They survived because someone protected them. Byzantium became the last working operating system of the ancient world, running old wisdom when everyone else's systems had crashed. Europe did not recover classical learning by accident. It recovered it because Byzantium never stopped carrying it forward. Byzantium did more than protect books. It protected order. When the Western Roman Empire fell, much of Europe slipped back into local rules and tribal customs, but Byzantium kept Roman law alive as a structured system. Under emperors like Justinian, the empire gathered and organized centuries of legal wisdom into one unified code. This code defined contracts, property rights, punishments, courts, and public responsibility. It turned justice into something written, not something decided by a chieftain's mood or a sword held over your head. Without this legal foundation, Europe would have had to rebuild fairness from nothing. And rebuilding law from nothing is harder than rebuilding buildings, because law is what separates society from chaos. Byzantium made sure that law did not die with Rome. It translated power into principle and custom into order. Even long after the empire disappeared, its legal thinking remained inside European institutions, universities, and courts. People today talk about the rebirth of Europe, but the truth is that rebirth was only possible because Byzantium kept the original blueprint alive when no one else. Good Byzantium was not only a guardian of knowledge, it was a physical shield that stopped entire civilizations from being erased. For nearly 1,000 years, it stood in the path of waves of invasions that were meant to sweep into Europe. Enemies from the east and south did not reach the heart of Europe because they first collided with Constantinople's walls, armies, and strategy. Many people today imagine history as if Western Europe naturally survived, but survival is never automatic. Someone has to hold the line. Byzantium was that line. If Constantinople had fallen centuries earlier, invaders would not have stopped at its gates. They would have continued westward, into lands that were still fragile and recovering. Whole cultures could have been swallowed before they ever had time to grow strong. The West needed a buffer zone, and Byzantium became that barrier. It bought time to rebuild cities, time to create schools, time to slowly recover after Rome's fall. Without this shield, there might not have been a Europe left to experience a Renaissance at all. Byzantium did not only protect ideas, it protected identity. While the world around it shifted, the empire became the center of Christian tradition, art, and spiritual life for millions of people. It created a style of worship, music, architecture, and sacred art that gave communities a shared identity strong enough to survive hardship. Without Byzantium, this entire cultural world would have fractured, scattered, or disappeared. Its churches, chants, icons, and rituals became a spiritual anchor at a time when borders kept changing and kingdoms kept falling. And this cultural survival was not just decoration. It shaped how whole nations understood themselves. When Byzantium sent missionaries to the Slavic world, it brought not only religion, but literacy and written language. It gave people the tools to speak to God, read scripture, and record their own history. Without that influence, large parts of Eastern Europe would never have developed the identity they still hold today. Byzantium was more than an empire on a map, it was a root system, silently feeding faith and culture long after others forgot where the source began. Byzantium did not survive this long by strength alone. It survived by intelligence. It was a master of diplomacy, often defeating enemies without raising a sword. While other kingdoms tried to win by force, Byzantium won by strategy, alliances, negotiations, marriages, tribute, and careful timing. Sometimes it paid enemies to fight each other instead of attacking. Sometimes it converted rivals into partners through religion and culture. It treated politics like a chessboard, not a battlefield. And that is how it stayed alive for centuries longer than anyone expected. Without this kind of diplomacy, Byzantium would have collapsed quickly, and its intellectual and cultural legacy would have disappeared with it. Military victories protect borders, but diplomacy protects time, and time is what the empire needed most. Every year it survived was another year of books preserved, schools still open, libraries still copying, and scholars still teaching. Its endurance was not luck, it was calculated survival. And because it lasted, the world inherited far more than a memory. It inherited continuity. Byzantium did not last forever, but even its collapse continued its work. When the empire finally weakened, its scholars, teachers, artists, and manuscripts did not die with it. They moved west. They carried Greek learning to Italy at the very moment Europe was ready to rediscover it. The Renaissance did not begin from thin air. It began because a falling empire handed its knowledge to the next one before the light went out. In this way, Byzantium did not disappear, it transformed. It became the bridge that carried the ancient world into the modern age. If the empire had collapsed earlier, when Europe was not yet ready, the knowledge would have vanished with it. The timing mattered. Byzantium held the torch until someone else could take it. Its final act was not defeat, but transfer. That is why its fall is not just a tragedy, it is a turning point. An old world closed, but it closed in a way that allowed a new world to open. Without this final passing of wisdom, the Renaissance might have come centuries later, or never in the same form at all. Even today, Byzantium is still present in ways most people never notice. Its legal thinking shapes modern courts, its architecture inspires churches and capitals, and its traditions still live in Orthodox worship across Eastern Europe and beyond. People walk through cities, study in classrooms, and take part in customs that carry Byzantine roots without ever hearing the name of the empire that preserved them. It is a ghost civilization, invisible in credit, but visible in results. This is why it feels forgotten, even though it never truly disappeared. The world absorbed Byzantium so completely that most people don't realize where these foundations came from. The empire may be gone from the map, but not from daily life. Its legacy hides in plain sight, in laws, languages, art, symbols of power, and even the way nations define identity and continuity. The story did not end in 1453. The empire simply changed form, and the modern world became its final vessel. Now imagine a world where Byzantium never stood between collapse and recovery. There would have been no preserved libraries to restart learning, no stable code of law to organize new states, and no cultural center to hold the East together while the West struggled to rebuild. Without this single empire acting as a bridge, the break after Rome's fall would not have been temporary. It would have become permanent. Instead of rebuilding, Europe would have had to reinvent everything from the ground up, and when a civilization must start from zero, it does not rise again in a few generations. It can take hundreds of years to regain what was lost, and by then, the shape of the world is different forever. Byzantium stopped that reset. It carried the memory of an older world across a dark age, and delivered it to a time that could use it again. So when people say Rome fell in 476, they are only telling half the story. Rome did not fall. It moved east, changed its language, and quietly guarded the future until the world was ready to inherit it. The modern age is not only built on Rome, it is built on the Rome that refused to die. If you see more video, like and subscribe. History tell us truth.